Once upon a time, in a land not so far away, in fact, today, and probably in your workplace, people were telling stories. Big stories, small stories, short stories, long stories. Stories about kids, stories about the weekend, stories about something that happened at an old workplace, stories about, well, anything really. Stories that made you laugh, made you get angry, made you shocked, worried, happy, or proud. When you stop to think about it, how many stories do you tell and hear every day? And now that you've stopped and thought about it, perhaps it might surprise you how naturally storytelling occurs in your daily interactions with people. And despite it being such a natural part of how we live and work, and despite storytelling being a tool that has been neurologically proven to grab people's attention and make things easier to understand and remember, we do not use it as much as we should. Instead, we use dot points, facts and figures, emails and charts, and then wonder why people don't care. So, how can we use storytelling more effectively in our communication? Well, that's what today's guest discussed with me for this episode of Less Chatter, More Matter. Soundari Mukherjee is a distinguished business storytelling coach, a TEDx speaker, leadership consultant, and a dynamic facilitator, renowned for her unique ability to weave the power of storytelling into the fabric of business communication. With a diverse international portfolio and a rich background spanning over 30 years in finance, operations, banking, and entrepreneurship, she excels in deepening client engagement and fostering strong relationships across sectors, including banking, consulting, and legal firms. She likes to call herself the Chief Everything/Experience Officer at Soundbites 11, her own organization, and believes life is all about connections and serendipity. Her big, hairy, audacious goal is to help leaders and teams drive business outcomes, build a personal brand, and be more human at work through storytelling. And her expertise in behavioral skills programs has made her a very sought-after figure in professional circles. When she's not working with clients or chatting with her children, family, or friends, or reading books, you will find her on the tennis court or working a pottery wheel. She is a woman of many talents. And as you will hear in today's episode, she's so talented at just weaving stories into every discussion she has. She tells so many stories in this short conversation. But through it, she makes some really good points around, well, what does storytelling actually mean in a corporate sense? How can we use it? And how can we help others to overcome their fear of it as well? So without further ado, here's Soundari. Welcome to Less Chatter, More Matter.
Thank you so much, Mel. Delighted to be having this conversation with you.
And I am delighted to have you on the show. So we've caught up a few times over the years, and I really love what you bring to the communications profession, which we'll get into in just a moment. But before we do, can you tell us a little bit about you? So what do you do, and how did you come to develop your expertise in that space?
Yeah. I think I'd like to call myself a Chief Everything Officer. It should be Chief Experience Officer, but maybe Chief Everything Officer at Soundbites 11. Wear a few hats. And I think one of my friends who heard from a mentor a long time back was told, follow your compass, not your clock. And that sort of guided me in creating a portfolio career for myself. So I'm a consultant, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I'm a visiting faculty, I mentor coach, I work on a few NGO boards. And I think a lot of this stemmed from my move to Bahrain in the Middle East in 2001, when I had an opportunity to become a freelancer for a friend and a mentor who was based out of Saudi Arabia. And as a new mom, I can't tell you how liberating it was to have that flexibility while going out and doing the purposeful work that we want to do. So that sort of guided that. But specifically on storytelling, I think my big, hairy, audacious goal is to help leaders and teams drive business outcomes, build a personal brand, and be more human at work through storytelling.
Oh, I love that. Be more human at work. And it's you've hit the nail on the head for me, because I feel like so often we talk like corporate robots when we're talking to humans, and it really, doesn't do us any favors. But so let's get into this. So why is storytelling such a powerful and important tool for for communicators.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what is that one thing we all want as communicators? And you do this a lot with your work, and also, of course, with the books that you've written. We want to drive outcomes because our messaging was relatable, it was memorable, and it's impactful. So broadly, that's what we want to do. We want to be in that space. And I can give the brain theory around it to say that, when somebody hears a story, multiple parts of the brain are engaged. You have the Wernicke's area, which controls language comprehension. You have the amygdala, which is the emotional response. And then you have the mirror neurons, which play a big role in creating empathy for each other. And when you have multiple parts of the brain which are engaged, our hippocampus, which became very popular with Inside Out, which stores short-term memories, becomes more likely to convert these experiences of hearing a story and creating a long-term memory out of it. Now, I'm not a doctor or a psychologist, so for me, storytelling has been more observational and experiential. I've always fascinated with the question of how do we grab attention of our decision makers and how do we inspire them to act? Say based on data, because as a finance MBA, I've always felt that I had two people sitting on my shoulders, one going after the numbers and one being human. And I won't say which is the devil and the angel, we'll leave that be. And I think over the last few years, that's where the work that I do in organizations and crafting strategies, communicating with impact came. And I realized when I work with leaders, and it's not something I think organically, it was not a eureka moment, but something that I realized saying that the most effective leaders share examples to make a point. And that's how they build trust. They just don't present data. I was just speaking to a friend of mine who's been a CEO of large banks across geographies in Southeast Asia. And I was telling him that I'm traveling this week to run data storytelling sessions. And I said how important it is these days, especially with AI mulling on all the data, that we need to have clean and good data. And he said, that's so right. And he could have just left it at that, saying, yeah, it's important to have clean and good data. He just went on to say that when I was working with this bank, we were like looking at how we can do market segmentation based on our client base. And we said, let's find out more branch wise. What are the segments? What are the target areas our clients are working? And he said that in one particular branch, we found that 37% of our customers were astronauts. And I said, what? How is that even possible? And he said, yeah.
Who knew there was that many astronauts?
Well, everybody had the same question because we language as profab. And he said, we went back and we checked what was happening. And what used to happen is that the clients would come to the branch, they would open the account, and the relationship managers, because they wanted to be helpful and no client wanted to fill a form, they would say, we'll fill the form for you. So they would take the ID documents, they'd have their names and all of that. And then when they had to fill the form, they were suddenly left with hundreds of forms to fill. So they would just click on the drop-down menu and pick anything. And right on the top, after the accountant maybe, was the astronaut. So it really was not useful. So we do need clean data. And for me, that was a great idea to communicate in a way that data couldn't have managed.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Sometimes I think people fear or, don't want to take on storytelling in a corporate sense because they think it might need to be this big elaborate story that you've crafted behind the scenes. But actually, it's those everyday anecdotes that you already have in your back pocket that I think most people don't realize you've already got the stories there. It's just a matter of knowing when to use them. And on that, what are some of the most effective ways to use storytelling?
Yeah. How can you use a personal story as a way to guide? But even if it's not the personal stories, and definitely personal stories are easy to remember, even if somebody says that data is my oil, and I see this happen when I work with a lot of product managers, tech folks, I ask them to share personal stories and they recoil. Literally, it's a physical recoil. And I remember I was running the session for a group of entrepreneurs and product managers, and they were saying, simplifying the complex. That's what we all want to have as a skill. And he had to explain what machine learning was. And he was at home, and his grandmom was asking him, "Hey, tell me what you do." And going and having to, he's saying, I had to go and explain what is machine learning to my grandmom. Not that she cannot understand technology, but I wanted to communicate in a way that it's simple. And he said, it's like how a machine takes something and learns and reiterates and keeps building on that learning. And it's like almost like grandmom, it's like how you would try a new recipe. You would make it for us and we would eat and we'd all taste it and say, oh, a little bit more salt, oh, a little less of the masala or something like that. And then you would refine it. And you are learning from that process. And I thought that was a great way to take a complex topic and make it really simple by using an analogy or a metaphor. So I think everywhere where it need not be personal story, it could be stories of your clients, the delight that they derive from your product. It could be a story of how things went wrong and how you helped turn things around. It could be how your product was invented, or it could be just something that you wanted to share a lesson or a point. And maybe I can give you one. A lot of the times when we work with, especially with startups and entrepreneurs, we are trying to tell them that, you have to look wider for talent instead of looking at a simple route. Don't look just close by, look wider, look for cross connections. Literally, having that M kind of a thing of interconnecting ideas and all of that. And you can keep telling about it, but it doesn't register. So I remember, I think this was, I'm now blanking out who said this in a podcast, but we talked about General Electric in 2013. They said that, we are GE, we are trying to work on complex problems. And one of the things that they were trying to work on was how to get the weight out of a fastener that fastens an aeroplane engine to the wing of a plane. Now, in a plane, if you take out the weight of anything, you save fuel. And so over the life of a plane, if you actually reduce the weight by like 70 to 80%, you save an enormous amount of money. But GE said, of course, we can solve this problem maybe by just getting our engineers to work. But why do we need to just look inward like this? We live in a world where we can take the brains of anybody and figure this out. So they posted this as an engineering problem in an engineering site called GrabCAD. And they created a contest. And they announced $7,000 for the winner and who in the world can take the most weight out of the fastener. That was the problem statement. And they said, we will give you access to GE's facilities. You can create things there and all of that. The 10 finalists who came, none of them were American. None of them were aeronautical engineers. The final winner, who took out 80% of the weight of the fastener, was a 21-year-old from Indonesia, a guy called Arni Kurniawan. And he managed to create that. And then they took that and created a 3D model and tested it out. So when we look very narrow and limited, we may not find what we want. And it could be a great example to share for organizations which are looking for projects or cross-collaborate. Look across generation, look across locations, and how can we create that? So I just
yeah, brilliant story, such a great story. And I think, you've talked about using story for explaining the complex, making it simple, inspiring people to look outside of the box. Strategy is a big one too, right? So every time an organization launches a new strategy, like every 3 years, that for me feels like a really big opportunity to use story, because a lot of the time it's like, here's our financial goals and here's our people goals and here's our product goals. And it's so boring. And then you just expect people to get excited about it. And it doesn't work that way. Have you seen something similar?
And especially, I think, when you have a 30,000 feet view on what the strategy is, say an organization which says, we want to be the most digitally transformed company in the world. What does that even mean to me? I'm working in a factory here doing my own thing. So how is it going to affect me? What is it going to change? And I think there are great examples of using really impactful stories, which have been, again, I really believe in taking something from another geography, another location, and mulling over it and seeing how you can apply it to your own self. When we actually introduce any change, and you work a lot on change, Mel, when we work a lot on change, the minute we do a push, there is a pushback. And that's because we sometimes really point fingers or say, "Oh, this is what is missing." And, we try to make it very local and personal. It's sometimes really useful to bring an example from outside and ask the team to reflect on it and find their own solutions. And that works really better. There was this a lady called Betsy Holden who used to be the VP head of foods for Kraft Foods in the US. And she was pregnant with a second child when she was looking for a bigger role. Her boss, who happened to be a white male, was like shifting jobs. And she thought, I can put my hat in for his role. And he had worked with her. He knew her very well. So she goes and talks to him. And let's call him Bill. And she says, "Bill, I'm going to put my hat in for that role. I hope you'll support me." Bill becomes quiet and for a moment thinks about it and says, "But Betsy, we've never had anybody with 2 kids handling that role." Now, again, Betsy can react in 100 different ways. She turns around and asks Bill, "Bill, how many kids do you have?" And he had 2 kids. And sometimes when we work with organizations and we say, we all hear the word unconscious bias, we will do 100 assessments and build awareness. But when it comes to action, it's that self-reflection and looking at some of these things which can really shift the needle. So that was a penny drop moment for Bill to rethink where his biases lay and to look at promotions very differently. And when we share this with organizations, when you're working with them on creating their policies, I think it's great to let people find their own realization moment instead of having to tell.
Yeah. And look, I love chatting to you because you are full of stories, and that's a brilliant story as well. Now we touched on this a little bit, but for some people, as I said, storytelling is uncomfortable because we're just so used to emails. Yeah, we're so used to chat. We're so used to get up and speak at a team meeting and everybody goes about their way. How can people get started with storytelling? And I think more importantly, how can we encourage leaders to use storytelling more?
I think stories are not a vendetta against data or bullet points. I think first realizing that, and I think Brené Brown said this beautifully, that stories are data with a soul. And I see data also as an aggregation of individual stories. And you said this really well in terms of saying that it's not the big things, but it's actually the really small incidents, the daily examples, because life is in those small moments. I remember Bill Murray, the American comedian, he said that we are not born with the ability to tell a story all the time. It's something that we work on and build on. You have to hear stories and then you have to live stories. So you get to we all have a bunch of experiences and then we turn up and say, "Here's something what happened to me yesterday." And if people connect and realize you are telling your story well. So I think it's not looking at a lot of different things. It's starting with the small, nimble things, which are, keep them running, the Trojan mice, as they're called, and see where they lead. And the other thing is also like how I know stand-up comedians do this a lot. They create these small sets, then they go to a club and they practice it, and they watch for audience reaction, and then making your notes and refining it. And I think, again, as communicators, we need to evangelize storytelling as well as help others.
I love that. Yes, we do have a dual role, don't we? Well, we almost have a triple role. Like we have to be able to tell good stories. We have to, as you say, evangelize or help people understand why they're important, and then educate others as well. And that's it's powerful, but it's a big responsibility on top of everything else that we do that is really important in organizations too.
And I think this is really important about practice and the theory and the practice part, right? Mastery requires being good at both theory and practice. Well, you can pick up the theory from a whole lot of places. For instance, I share videos every Thursday on how can you use storytelling in a context. You have your podcast, lot of good things that we can hear from leaders, articles and all of that. But then it comes to the practice. You have to say it. And if you're stuck at that point where you're struggling to convert both, I would say, I mean, hint, hint, but get a coach. So not just for yourself, but also for your team. So you can all grow your storytelling muscle and be each other's buddies in the process.
That's a really good point, actually. And, you know, none of us are born excellent communicators. Like everything we learn. We learned how to walk, we learned how to talk, we learned how to write and those things. Like, this is something you have to practice. And I think the enemy of progress is perfection, right? So if you think you've reached perfect, well, you've stopped learning. So progress is where the magic happens. And find those supportive places where you can practice this, and find those coaches if you feel like you need that one-on-one support. And there's plenty of online groups and all those sorts of places where you can get advice for free. You can learn for free, like your LinkedIn videos every Thursday. That's all free. You put that value out there. So I love that. Thank you so much. Okay, last question. AI. It's everywhere. There's a lot of communicators out there who went, oh, it's worried it's going to take my job. I have my own views on that. But in what ways do you think we could use AI to enhance storytelling, or even just help people get started with storytelling?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I really wonder about this because I think we're all straddling that balance between being AI cautious and AI curious. At a very base level, it can be a great co-pilot to help you craft your messaging, but the voice has to be yours because your voice is what builds trust. So there are two, maybe there are many more, but there are two things, like one on how organizations can use AI and people can use AI, and how can it communicate about AI. And I think as communicators again, and when we have a new thing like AI, you need to go straight for those concrete examples. But you can also share use cases. So you are talking about how an organization is using AI. And I think organizations can really lead that to build that stakeholder confidence. Like there's an organization called Open Lab, which is a sustainable fashion initiative. And it has introduced an AI-powered sorting tool to help speed up garment recycling process. And it has done this in collaboration with cross-industry partners like H&M, and there is a Hong Kong Research Institute of Textiles and Apparel. Now, previously, this sorting process was labor-intensive. It posed a lot of health risk, and it was difficult to maintain hygiene standards. But using this AI process, you're able to actually categorize the fabric by process, sorting it automatically before it can be turned into new yarn. So it reduces time, it reduces the manual effort, and you get a better output. But humans are leading this, and sharing examples like this can sharpen the use cases and help organizations really learn from each other. And you build trust with the stakeholders instead of saying, it's going to take off my job. And there are no extremes. It gives us an idea of how we can use this as our tool to drive outcomes.
I love that story. And if I may add, like I've used AI to help just get ideas started as well with storytelling. So, for example, let's say I'm working on a new strategy for a client. They're rolling that out to their organization. Going into something like Google Gemini and saying, this, let's say, for example, this company is an insurance company and they've got a new 5-year plan. What is a good analogy for a company in this industry that has a new 5-year plan? Not putting in all the sensitive details, of course, and just seeing what it comes back with. Sometimes it's like, it's like building a ship, or it's like, climbing a mountain and whatever it might be. But for people who are really stuck, it's just a great place to get those creative juices flowing, I think, rather than doing it all for you, but at least get you start thinking about analogies and metaphors. And also it's a great search engine in a way.
Absolutely. I think we have limited resources and we have limited time. If Maslow were to redo his hierarchy, time would be right on top, right? So definitely for that. And I think we tend to add on things to what we have to do. This really helps us think at scale. And then filter and look at what we need to use for what specifics, for sure.
Yeah, love that. Well, I have 3 questions that I ask every guest on the podcast. Are you ready for those?
Yes.
All right, let's go. What is one of the best communication lessons you've ever learned, and how did it change the way you approach communication?
I think this was Marshall Gans in 2007. He talked about stories being very specific, evoke a very particular time, place, setting, mood, the sound, the texture, everything. So the more you communicate this specificity, the more power your story will have to engage others. And it's actually the specificity of that experience that brings an insight. And I saw this at play. I knew this again theoretically. During COVID, I was working with an NGO in the interiors of Tamil Nadu, where I was talking to students, teachers, and parents about creativity and innovation, how to keep it going. I was really thrilled to have that opportunity, to have that reach there, sitting here in Hong Kong, being able to do that work, which was closer to my hometown. And I mentioned about something about my father and a particular village that he originally came from and how he moved from there and what are some of the things that he did. And at the end of the conversation, one of the teachers in that group said, I am from that village. I know exactly what you're talking about. And I was blown away, literally. And so for me, that specificity has built so many serendipitous connections. And I think we don't do that enough. We tend to talk on the layer, on the surface. I think it's really important to be specific.
And that's a really good point. You know, apart from specificity, also helps us visualize things more clearly and therefore connect with, instead of just saying, well, I walked down the street and saying, I walked down the dusty road, we can see that more in our mind and connect with the story. But also there's some behavioral science research around the value of using specific numbers and specific words in terms of building trust and credibility as well. So that's a really good lesson to learn. Thank you for sharing. Next question. What's one thing you wish people would do more of or do less of when communicating?
Maybe I'll start with a less of. I wish people will talk less about stories and actually share stories. But and more of is definitely the practice. We know the power of stories to help us think differently, feel differently, act differently, but it's so understated. Like you mentioned, actually, and I was thinking about it. When we were kids, school kids, and we learned a new word, we would get so excited and we would use it immediately in a sentence and wait for audience reaction and all of that. And I think we can use stories in a business context in exactly the same way. We all listen to a lot of stories. We have a lot of experiences. We need to try it out. Of course, in a business context, we need to keep it really crisp. And that's where, again, the practice really comes from. If I was sitting in a bar with you, I could tell the same G example as like a 5-10 minute long, add all the details. But when we're talking to CEOs and when you're talking to teams and stakeholders, we need to get the gist of the message in. And that requires practice.
Yeah, I love that. I could talk to you all day about this stuff, but I won't, because then we'd be talking about storytelling like you just said instead of doing it. Last one. Who do you turn to for communication advice?
Oh, I like to think that I have this personal board of advisors. They've been like voluntold into those positions. So they're all there. So at a very basic level, of course, it's books, like things like, I love Morgan Housel's blog. Which he writes called Collaborative Fund. So many examples and stories. And he's talking about finance. So that I really like that subject. But it also talks about it with historical examples and stories. And I just, I'm blown away by that. So books like that, for instance, sometimes even in Economist, where they will say that, we are following a strategy, investment strategy, which is like the baseline play of Beyond Bold or something like that. So, a lot of places. Friends from IABC for sure. And I'm saying IABC as a name, but I think it's friends that I've met through IABC, with whom I do have a lot of discussions. This conversation was so clarifying in my mind, as I was saying. We have a huge TEDx Tinha women community that I'm part of, where I'm part of the curation team. So I'm a TEDx coach and recently did a TEDx speech as well, which I'm like really thrilled to tick off in a way. So there's so many in that community that, I can just, they're literally in a way available on tap, respecting their time, of course. But
Yes.
I think some of these really work for me.
Oh, look, I totally agree. It's learning from by osmosis in a way, isn't it? Like, you listen to podcasts, you read blogs, you see what people are sharing on LinkedIn, and then just having those people you can reach out to and just go, look, can I just test something with you? Or have I got the right idea here? Or am I making stuff up? Like, those little sense checks as well, I think are so important just to have that community, especially when, like me, you largely work by yourself and you need that community around you. Well, Sundari, thank you so much for being on the show today. If people would like to learn more about you and get in touch, how can they do that?
Yeah, no, thank you for this conversation. I mean, it was one of those crisp, happy conversations. I think the best way to reach out is on LinkedIn. Pretty active on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, again, thank you so much. Lovely to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Mel, and look forward to continuing our conversation offline as well.
Me too.